Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Amy Schreiber.
And I'm Hilary Zwallen. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our episode today. In honor of the fact that we have taken a 2-week break from our social media due to travels, we wanted to talk about intentional media consumption and all that goes along with media usage.
Yes. So here we are. Let's talk.
So, interesting and disturbing stats, kind of. Americans spend over 11 hours per day consuming media via screen or radio. And 4 of those hours is live TV per day. And this is rising. This is like an hour more than in 2017. And this doesn't even include books. So this is like non-print stuff. So I thought that was wild. That's a whole day.
I totally believe it though, because I think about myself and as much as I like to be like, I take breaks, I'm like always listening to something. I'm always listening to an audiobook or podcast, the news. There's just always something going on. And I mean, that's got to be affecting us on some level.
Yeah,
right?
It is just a constant stream of content. So I think the biggest problem with flooding our minds with content like this all the time is that it just creates a constant state of distraction and busyness.
Right.
You know, it's like this frantic gluttony. I was reading a great article on Brain Pickings blog, and she quotes Lewis Carroll as saying that mental gluttony, it's a dangerous propensity tending to weakness of digestive power, and in some cases to loss of appetite. So you can think of media consumption just like food consumption, like eating too much, even if it's perfectly great content. You don't have time to digest and reflect and integrate them if it's so constant and it's just like flying in and out. You have no time to really digest.
Amen to that. I feel that all the time. That makes a lot of sense because I would say one of the biggest struggles I deal with is just like not being able to calm it down. And I was telling you before we went live today, just even last night, I was planning on working on my novel. I'm getting pretty far on it. And I'm feeling like the urge of like, I've got to get this done. But I was really tired last night. And so I'm just laying there and I'm like, I'm just going to check Instagram. And it was one of those like
famous last words.
Yes. And you just like click, 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 click. And suddenly you're like scrolling through random strangers' profiles and you're just like, what am I doing? What? And then like an hour goes by and then you feel just terrible about yourself. And it's like, this is bad. I could have at least watched some crappy TV show for that amount of time. And I didn't do it. So I'm sure there's people out there that can relate to that.
For sure.
So why don't we talk a little bit about some tips that are available on how to limit media consumption for those of you who are wondering what the point is, right?
Right. Well, yeah. And why to limit it? We live in this fast food culture. And the problem with like a fast media culture is that you don't ever grow the patience to explore things and ideas more deeply. You're just always only skimming the surface, the quick lists, quick headlines. You know, it's a problem because you don't have the ability to dive deeper. And this loss of patience is connected to a loss of overall thoughtfulness and connection with real humans in general, including yourself.
It's interesting to see how it's evolving too, because I'm on Marco Polo, this app, often now. And it's only been in the last couple months. And I've pondered this because on the one hand, it's video, basically like a video walkie-talkie. And so I've reconnected with friends who I haven't talked to in like 10 years. And now I'm like talking to them on the regular and I love it. And on the one hand, it's like my husband is like, oh my gosh, you're on that stupid app again. Like, hello, I'm here. Let's chat, which I get. But on the other hand, I feel like, wow, this is really helping me. Like, remember when Instagram came out first, and it was like, oh my gosh, look at these cute pictures of all my friends and their family. And same with Facebook, I guess, too. Like now I'm connected to people that I would have never known what they were up to, because of the way that life takes you and you move and you're out of, college or wherever. And so it was like this great thing initially. And then it becomes this like highlight reel that I think makes people feel kind of weird inside often. Right.
No, there is that. And for sure too.
Anyway, this concept of like, there's almost this evolution of how we're relating to people. I mean, obviously that's what's happening within social media. And I find that, when Instagram stories first came out, and I know younger people had been doing Snapchat forever. I hadn't been on Snapchat. I couldn't figure out the app because I'm probably too old. But but when Instagram stories came on, I was like, I love this. This is great. It's so fun to make stories and it's so fun to see stories. And it's just great. And then Marco Polo, I get on Marco Polo and now I'm like, wait, I don't even care about Instagram stories. It's really just a time suck. And what I want is one-on-one interaction, but everyone's lives are so busy. It really works well because of, you can just get on, leave the message, someone can get to it, consume it, respond when they want to. And I'm having all these like deep, meaningful conversations that would take forever in an email or, I don't know, people just don't make phone calls anymore because who has time to schedule it?
Right. Well, FaceTime, like scheduling the logistics.
Right. So I don't know. My question is more just, or my thought is more, is that a bad thing or is that just a reflection of where we're at now? And I definitely feel this collective pull to have more meaningful connections. It's almost like the pendulum swung one way where we were like social media connected. And that's not going to go away right away or if ever, I don't know. But there's this like surfacey situation going on with the constant connection to people on this like this plane where we're not having like deep connections and deep conversations and vulnerability.
Right. I think the question is like is it good or bad? I think it's like all technology is, depending on what it's being used for, it can be good or it can be bad. Like it's not, technology and connectivity is not inherently bad.
I don't know that it's the good or versus bad, but more just that there's a level of, there's this evolution of how we are connecting deeply with humans. And some of it is face-to-face contact. I mean, I think being the social animals that we are, that's obviously, that goes without saying. And there's an element of when we are one-on-one, face-to-face with people, we're in our phones. Like I know I am, and there's an element of like protection, or that we can kind of shield our own social anxiety by pulling out the phone and checking something when we're standing in a group of people rather than talking about something or really getting to know them on the one hand. And then on the other hand, there are these interesting mediums where we are able to connect on a really deep level with people who we know are, part of our quote unquote tribe, who we may not, because we have kids or because have busy careers or whatever, we're not in college anymore, we're not in high school anymore, where everything revolves around a social structure. Now there's these new ways of relating. But even to that end, I'm probably on Marco Polo way too much. Like it's way extreme, it's something where it's like, well, I can't dedicate hours a day, like to these conversations. Right? Like I have responsibilities and things. So I don't know what the answer is, girl.
Right. Well, yeah, I think the question really to ask is, by what we consume and what we are spending our time in, is this feeding like the love and compassion part of ourselves and feeding actual connectivity? Or is this nourishing like violence and suffering and taking us away from being present with like what is actually around us? Like that's the question to ask. Thich Nhat Hanh, I was reading his Art of Communication book a couple years back, and he talked about consuming things. He said, nothing can survive without food. Everything we consume either acts to heal us or to poison us. And so thinking about nourishment as what we take in through our eyes, our ears, everything. It's all food to us, including the conversation. So is this healthy for us, helping us grow and evolve in a positive direction? Or is it not? Is it going the other way?
Well, and even maybe something that is good and inherently positive, maybe it's the positive messages or whatever you're exposing yourself to, even too much of that. There can be almost a tipping point of there can be too much just noise in general, right? Like
Right.
I think of the concept of addiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes addiction is associated with substances. But now there's social media addiction and there's, and I think there can even be people that are like religiously addicted or whatever.
Well, yeah, anything.
Right. So tips for the listeners.
Before we move on, one of my favorite songs that I have heard this year is called Disillusioned by a Perfect Circle. And I would encourage everyone to go watch that music video, whether or not you're into that type of music, because it so excellently illustrates the problem of constant screen time. Like the chorus is time to put the silicon obsession down and take a look around and find a way in the silence. It's like really good lyrics, but very well illustrated. So that brings us into our additional tips about consuming media in a thoughtful way.
Yes. So number one tip is check your time spent.
Yes.
So now the latest iPhone update, it logs your hours on your phone.
Wow.
And on different media apps. And it'll tell you whether you're up this week or down this week. And it's pretty crazy to see how much time one spends on the phone. And I find, I hardly watch TV anymore. I'll watch stuff on my phone. Like I'll go on and watch shows on my phone. So the time goes up.
Yeah, I honestly don't know why anyone would watch TV when you have Netflix and stuff. Like you don't have to sit through hours and hours of commercials.
Well, sometimes you just don't want a tiny little screen that's like hurting your eyes at the end of the day. Like I like to watch stuff on TV every once in a while, but yeah, like if you just want to be alone, like at the end of the day when you want to sequester yourself up in your room after you've had like little kids yelling and screaming all day. Not that they always do that, but you know what I mean? Sometimes you just want a minute alone. I feel like I'm becoming much more of an introvert as I get older, Amy. Do you find this to be the case?
I've always been
naturally kind of an introvert.
I don't feel it being more or less. It's just always been really extremely oriented that way.
Yes. I'm just surprised because I always thought of myself as an extrovert and I love nothing more than just like, I got to recharge alone these days. I don't know. It's weird. It's like a different, I wonder if there's some sort of, I know I'm digressing here, but I wonder if there's some sort of midlife shift that can happen or if it's like, are you always an extrovert or are you always an introvert?
Right. Well, yeah, that's what we talk about with our cycles. Like you have all these life cycles within your life. That's been our kind of cycle series. And like, so that probably has to do with it.
Yep, probably. Okay. So number 2 is check your bias. We wanted to talk about kind of responsible media consumption. So not only is it just how does it make you feel, but it's also what are you consuming and is it all one-sided?
Right.
So to check your own intrinsic bias. So before we started this recording today, I found this article that talks about the implicit bias test that Harvard University has, and anyone can take it. And it's implicit.harvard.edu.
Oh.
And you can take, they're like 10-minute tests, and they talk about your implicit biases. And they've got it towards weapons. They have it towards disabilities, gender, sexuality, age, race, religion, skin tone. I mean, they have all these different types of tests that you can take to see what your implicit biases are. And it's just information. I thought it was really interesting to go through and just see what you're automatically leaning towards and to just be aware of that. I think the idea is, we are all a certain way in some ways. Right? Like we come a certain way. We are exposed to our own homogeneous culture within our family unit, depending on whether we're, middle-class white person, or if we live in the Middle East, or if we live in Europe, or if we live in Australia or East Asia or wherever. Right. And all of those things are going to affect us. And even when we think that we are the most open-minded or, well-intentioned person, we do have these implicit biases. And so anyway, I just thought in terms of how we take and consume media, I know that oftentimes, especially during this really charged political climate. I have some friends who are like, I don't even know a Trump supporter. Who supports Trump? And then I'll have other friends that are like, how can you not love guns or whatever? Because of our upbringing. Like, I have half of my family is Mormon in Utah, and the other, and then I live in California. So part of it's like, it's kind of a problem if you don't know anyone from that's on the other side of the argument with you. Right. I mean, there's an issue there. If you literally don't know one person who is a Republican or who supports Trump, it's like, why would they support Trump? Like, let's figure out what's underneath
that's
that. Because
why
there's a lot of things
people have fear and such division, because there's like no mixing and mixing of ideas, exposing yourself to ideas that are different than yours and are not in line with all your biases is the only way to like improve your own ideas and make yourself better informed.
And maybe the question is, do you want, is this like, how do we become a more tolerant human race is by checking our biases and maybe consuming media that you're not inclined to go for. Because part of the danger, I think, with these algorithms that you click on one thing and then it starts to feed you content that's like that. And so you're constantly being presented with stuff that's in line with your interest, which is great on the one hand. Like, yay, now I'm just reading all this stuff about, like, for me, it's like, yay, I'm reading about crystals and I'm reading about, business or whatever it is that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
But then I think, well, maybe it's important to be exposed to stuff that I'm not totally in line with.
100%.
Maybe there's an element of that where it's like, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to like go sit on the sports page all day or whatever, but it's check your own biases. And then number 3 is check the biases of the media you are consuming. And so really getting clear and some, it's hard when everyone's like, we're fair and balanced news, right? But, are you only consuming CNN? Are you only consuming BBC? Are you only consuming PBS? Are you only consuming Fox News?
Are you only consuming big news channels that are paid for by advertisements? That's why you look into some independent little things, look into the big things. Like, a full spectrum of information is really important if you're trying to like get to the bottom of things, like get actual factual good information. There's a lot though. Yeah. It's hard.
And I've noticed that there's this new, I started following a reporter named Jessica Yellen, who is a political correspondent, I think, for years. And now she's doing the news on Instagram. And I love it because she distinguishes between news and noise. And she'll sometimes report noise, but she says this is noise. And I think that's really helpful to the average news consumer. And I wonder if that's kind of the way that it's going to change, because there is this element, even for me, like I'll watch CNN because I'm a little more liberal. But even when I'm watching CNN, I'm just like, I just feel like I'm being spoon-fed stuff. Like, I just want the facts. I don't want 2 screaming opposing views, like causing my blood pressure to rise every day. So now I'm finding these independent reporters that I feel like are giving me both sides of the story. So it's interesting too. Now we have Twitter, so we can follow individual reporters, which I know they're paid by news organizations too, but it's just great to be using that critical thinking.
Right. Well, and mind. I think too, there are a lot of people, like you kind of touched on the idea of, with becoming aware of your own biases, there's this fear, I think, that a lot of people inherently have. They have an idea, they have an opinion or a belief. They don't want to look at things that are going to challenge that belief, because then their identity will fall apart or whatever. But I think that's really common, like how we grew up. It was this idea that outside information is going to destroy your faith. So it's to be feared. And I think there's a really big difference between thoughtfully curating information for yourself that you think is going to be helpful and censorship. Like, one of them is a fear-based approach, and one is an approach rooted in just love and respect for yourself in your own time. So keeping things like
Aimee,
that in mind.
that's great. That's some serious wisdom dropped right there.
Well, I was thinking about that because, I mean, I've been talking with my younger sisters too, and realizing that you and I were kind of the last generation of LDS kids growing up without widespread internet information around. So there was
Right.
still that story of everything you look at outside, like potentially is exposing you to the evils of Satan. I don't think it's nearly so much like that anymore, but
Maybe not. Yeah, I know. I know that I've been out of the church for like almost 4 years. I feel like things are changing, but who knows? I agree with you that on the one hand, it was like, find, all good, all truth, find truth in other things. But if it goes against our church narrative, then it's anti-Mormon literature and you must stay away.
Right.
And that's that's Satan bringing us down. When what you find out when you start to read a lot of the stuff is that it's actually historical fact and not that. But yeah, it's interesting that, because it's not that it's like you can't read a book by Thich Nhat Hanh. That's fine. But if it's opposing,
if it challenges,
if it
in
doesn't
some way,
reinforce the narrative, then you better think twice, And that goes for probably most religions, right? I mean,
well, I think it operates with a lot of different ideas, like you take like any ism that can become dogmatic veganism. Yeah, all this food stuff. I think that attitude can creep in really easily. So yeah, it's something to be aware of.
Well, and even the concept of that there is one right way. Mm-hmm. For me, one of the biggest things I've shed, and I think this can tie into our topic today in terms of media usage, is that there is one truth. There's not. Even give any circumstance that goes down, like anything, any event, the event occurs and all the participants of the event have an individual experience of how they experienced the event, whether they were the victim of the event, the perpetrator of the event, the rescuer of the event, a bystander, an observer. Mm-hmm. And that creates the experience. And then the story is told somehow. Mm-hmm. So my point is, it's important to check the biases and to ask yourself, okay, where am I engaging in this moment, whether it be in my religion, in my political beliefs, in my family, and is there one right way? Is there one truth?
Well,
I don't know.
I mean, I think that kind of goes, I like the way the Buddhists talk about the concept of like judging things like, oh, did this thing that happen? Is it great or is it bad? And how the whole act of judging that stuff, in the end, if you take it far enough, is, they have the story, the kid breaks his leg, everyone's like, that's terrible, but then he didn't get drafted into the army, so that's great, but then the cow sat on him or whatever. Like each event has its side of good outcomes. Like terrible things can come from great things, and great things can come from terrible things. Like when you look, I mean, I don't know that that's where we want to go right now at all. But yeah, just things to think about.
Well, but I mean, I know we've kind of gone, but now we're back into a narrative. We're back into the narrative discussion. And I don't think that's a bad one to have. I think that's something that having that in your back pocket in how you are consuming the story of your own life, right? Because we create our own narratives every single day as we walk around, right? So, and our experiences, whether we're in suffering or we're not in suffering. So I can see how, I mean, it's just one track. It's just one. It's like, okay, so now we're bombarding ourselves with external media on the one hand, but then what is the narrative story that we're telling ourselves about our lives and how we're showing up in our lives? So yeah, I know we could that could take us down a rabbit hole for sure. And I know we're just about out of time. We wanted to keep this one short and sweet for you guys. Aimee, do you want to talk a little bit about what we have coming up for the podcast?
We have some exciting interviews coming up. We have Lisa Lister, one of our favorite authors, to complete our cycle series. So that'll be next week. What are some of the interviews that you have coming up?
So I have a few in the works that I don't want to say yet because I'm not sure if everybody's committed, but we're hoping to get an astrologer on here. And I really want to see, because I feel like there's been this resurgence. Maybe it's just me, I hate to make these blanket statements like everybody's interested in astrology, but I know when I go to Costco and they're selling astrology books on the table that I'm like, oh, okay. So it's not just me.
It has
there's
become
definitely
trendy.
this resurgence. Yeah. Like it's back in the zeitgeist. People are interested in how we are affected by the stars. And so I'm working on setting up an interview with an astrologer, who also is involved in Kundalini. And I wanted to see, how does that work with not just your own life, but like in business and business creation. Yeah. So we've got a few others. I'd love to hear from our listeners as to where do you want us to focus? Because I'm really inclined I want to talk to all the woo people, I want to go down the woo rabbit hole and see how all that plays out. I wanted to get a medium and a psychic on here maybe. Anyway.
I think it's really interesting to look into all of that because it's something that was a very fringe ideas that people who were into them were afraid to even admit that they were, but it has become way more popular and accepted. Yeah, we would love to hear from listeners about what you're interested in hearing, what kinds of topics you want to hear. And also we had an idea to do kind of like a book celebration episode. Would you guys be interested in hearing about books and what we love? And I mean, we always talk about it anyway with each one, but doing a book specific one, we thought would be kind of fun. So yeah, we would love your feedback and to help plan out our schedule for the coming new year.
Yes. And before we part, we want to send out, thoughts and prayers for everyone in California. We're in California right now, and the air is so bad from the fires. And we just think about all these people that are without homes now and that are suffering with what's going on. And we just wanted to put that out there that, thoughts and prayers and, good.
Yes.
I don't even know what to say. I just feel like it's so sad.
Mm-hmm. Also, final challenge, lay off the screens for like a day and see how much time you spend on it, like how much time you can save and like what you want to do with it. Because I find, like when you fast, you realize how much time you spend thinking about food, eating food, shopping for it, planning it. And the same thing goes with like, for me, social media. Like this last 2 weeks, haven't been on Instagram because we were taking a break from the podcast. And I was like, wow, I have so much time. Like, what am I going to do? I spent more time reading and drawing and stuff. So see what like fun things what possibilities lie in the time that everyone's spending on their screens. So fun little challenge.
I like it, Amy. All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.